Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, COVID-19 Communication Guidelines, Addressing Employee and Customer Questions. Before we get started today, I'd like to go over a few items so that everybody understands how to participate in today's event. My name is Kathy Meter, and I'm the Vice President of Member Education Services at the RSPA. I'll be moderating this webinar today, so part of my responsibility will be to field questions during the Q&A portion of the webinar. You should see something that looks like the box on your own computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. Because we are recording this session, we are asking that all attendees mute their lines, but you will have the opportunity to submit text questions by typing your question into the chat box. You may submit those questions at any time during the presentation. In addition to the chat box, we will open the phone lines during the Q&A session, and you may ask your questions verbally at that time. Please note that this session is being recorded, and it will be available tomorrow on demand on our website, www.gorspa.org/education. In addition to being available to you, in case you'd like to re-listen, we encourage you to share the recording with colleagues or team members who are unable to attend. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank RSPA's 2020 Platinum sponsors. Without their sponsorship of the association, webinars and information being brought to you like this would not be possible. Our 2020 Platinum sponsors are Blue Star, Heartland, ScanSource, and Shift4 Payments. I would now like to introduce the CEO of the RSPA, John Kirk. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kathy. And gang, we appreciate you taking the time out of your day and participating in this important webinar. You know, the RSPA has been a rallying point since 1948 during the best of times. And when you think about it, we've got to be a rallying point now as we fly through the storm together. And that's what we're going to do. There'll be some other ways that we think we can bring unique value to you and assist in some small measure as we navigate these waters. But for now, we're going to focus on the most basic of things. We're going to focus on guidelines that can guide your communication with one another, with your team, and with your customers. And we're fortunate to have two unique professionals, Bob Goldberg, our General Counsel, and our Chair expertise and insight, and I'm going to share that with you and make you better for it as we move forward. So if you look at the agenda today, just high level outline, Bob will go through some basic do's, don'ts, and maybes with respect to the guidelines of communication. He will then transition to Chelsey, and she's going to give you some very valuable information as well around the business case of why communication is so critical at this time. We've got to stand up and be counted. And as Kathy mentioned, we'll have ample time for community Q&A. We want to know what's on your mind. We want to know how we can help you. And this is one step of many that we'll be taking together. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our General Counsel, Bob Goldberg, and he'll kick things off. And thank you again for attending. And let's stay together, gang, as we work through this as one. Bob, take it away.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending on which side of the Mississippi River you are. These are clearly very historical times. As you see, the slide that's up now, perhaps the most important thing you can take away from this presentation is my email address. I'm working remotely, as most people are. And if you email me with your questions, I'm happy to answer those. I want to thank both John Kirk and Kathy Meter for taking this step to bring this critical information to our membership. It's just wonderful that RSPA got on this so quickly and is able to share with you some of the do's and don'ts. If we can move on, Kathy, to the first slide. I know the next slide is Chelsey, which you'll much better. There we go. Thank you. We are in a historic challenge, ladies and gentlemen. This is an incredible time where there are really no concrete rules as to what's happening. What the government is trying to do, and when I refer to the government, I'm referring to the United States, is to slow the spread of COVID-19, to slow the spread of coronavirus throughout the United States. What is being attempted to do is flatten the curve so that the peak infections do not all come at the same time and overwhelm our hospitals and our healthcare providers. What is incredible is that we will close borders, we will shut down cities, we will do all types of things to try to prevent the 28-day cycle that exists. Most of you may think it's 14 days, but there's 14 days for the incubation, and then the symptoms will come, followed by another 14 days of isolation. So, where do you go for good information? I have seen scores of poor information and conflicting information. The World Health Organization is one of those sites that you can go to and get current information, but recognize the facts, figures, and information provided by the WHO is for the entire world and not just the United States. So therefore, you would also want to look at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, for what they are saying. And they are saying things differently each and every day. The WHO, the World Health Organization, did finally declare this as a pandemic. It was important that they did that, for it raised the level of responses, it raised what can be done and what can't be done, and was followed quickly by the United States, President Trump, issuing a national emergency and also saying that there's a pandemic. The pandemic designation makes things different in terms of other laws and regulations which may be affecting your business. So there are also state restrictions. I'm in the state of Illinois. All bars and restaurants have been closed. All casinos have been closed. All health clubs have been closed. People are asked to work remotely. We have not had a lockdown of the city of Chicago, but that could happen at some point. The city of Chicago has banned gatherings bigger than 50. It may go down to 10, but the city was quite offended last Saturday when there were scores of St. Patrick's Day celebrations where people were lying to get together. We can't have that. We need to spread and slow the infections, for there is no cure, there is no vaccine, there's nothing that could be done. Now, what are the laws that you need to be concerned of as a business person? First is the American with Disabilities Act. If you're contract COVID-19, you have certain rights as a disabled person, because this is a disability, a medical emergency that comes out. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission rules provide that you can't discriminate among your employees. You can't retaliate if they're ill. OSHA has requirements for things in your office that you need to provide and could provide. The Family Leave Act, if you have more than 50 employees, provides certain periods of unpaid leave on a federal basis, but most states have increased those requirements to companies of less than 50 individuals. So therefore, that's another one of the statutes we need to look at. HIPAA is for privacy, and we'll talk about a little later the privacy concerns. And of course, the National Labor Relations Board has also been issuing guidelines for people to be concerned with. Your employee manual and policies and procedure manual probably do not apply to COVID-19. These were written with PTO, sick leave, vacation leave, not with a pandemic that would force one to stay at home for 14 days in self-isolation. So often those policies and procedures will need to be supplemented, need to be waived in certain respects and may not be the total guide that you need. The key to all of this, and we're so fortunate to have Chelsey Paulson to speak to us later about communication. Communication is going to be the key. I'll just hit it here by saying communication to your employees, communication to your customers. You're going to need to do both and do it often. I will say that I, like all of you, have received countless things from suppliers saying, we're all concerned about our employees and the public and this and that. That's not the important, that introductory language which you see, it is important, but it loses its meaning after you read it multiple times. What you need to do is go down and see exactly what these providers are doing in regard to their business and their relations with you. Is it distancing? You know, if you looked at the Today Show this morning, they have their anchors in different studios. We're supposed to stay 6 feet apart from each other. Are you disinfecting if you can find disinfectant and other things, but constantly cleaning surfaces that are being touched by other people? Are you going into self-isolation? Many companies have a disaster plan which was implemented for hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, whatever it's been. This isn't the time to write a disaster plan for your business, but you should outline at least the minimum how you're going to handle day-to-day things. And after we get through COVID-19, that may be the time that you put together a disaster plan that puts together phone numbers for people to phone in, information that will be available on websites and communication tools. We'll help you with that, but now isn't the time to do it, but keep notes of what you're doing so we can include it later on. Kathy, can we move on to the next slide, please? Let's talk about your employees. What can you do with your employees? And let me share with you that things that were prohibited last week are not prohibited in some cases this week. If you have an employee that is home, that is sick, they should stay at home. You can insist upon them staying at home. You should send them home if they have an illness or showing any of the symptoms for COVID-19. That would be fever, dry cough, shortness of breath. They don't have to have all three. In fact, people have been complaining that if you're taking an aspirin type product, it could lower your fever. But if someone's not feeling well, showing any of the symptoms, they should be sent home immediately. This is a hazard that's in your business. If you allow it to stay and continue, you could have exposure and liability to others of your employees. You need to take action. If you're sick, stay home. If someone comes to work ill, send them home. Since it's a pandemic, you may ask if people have those symptoms. Normally, we're not allowed to ask about symptoms and medical conditions, but in this instance, you may ask, do you have a fever? Do you have a dry cough? Do you have shortness of breath? People are, I don't feel that good. Things aren't going that well. We want you to go and have a test. You can send someone for testing, and if they're showing some of the symptoms, and the government has asked our insurance carriers to pay for those tests, and that has happened. Now, what happens when you send your person home? You have exempt employees and non-exempt employees. Those are the two categories that you've come to learn about in regard to overtime compensation. An exempt employee, and I hate to use the term, but typically they're on salary, but these are more executive management, administrative people. Salary alone doesn't make one exempt. Non-exempt are your hourly individuals. If you send an exempt employee home or they're working remotely, if they do anything during a pay period of 1 week, then they're entitled to their compensation. On the other hand, a non-exempt employee, if they're not working, they are not entitled to compensation. If they are working remotely, however, non-exempt employees you should make sure they take their breaks if they're entitled to, their lunch breaks. And I would suggest you have non-exempt employees keep track of their time and what they're doing. You as an employer Be careful if you're texting non-exempt employees or emailing them outside of normal work hours, because this will entitle them to overtime compensation. You may need to call upon them, but recognize that if you do, there are requirements for overtime compensation. You can mandate now that your employees wash their hands 3 times a day. You can tell them it has to be for 20 seconds. They have to sing happy birthday out loud, whatever you want them to do. You can make available to your employees masks, gloves, and gowns. You may not require that they wear those. You can make them available, but it is optional, and you cannot mandate that an employee wear a mask, glove, or gown. Now, those employees that are sent home, those employees that are not being paid, there are options for that, and there'll be even more options shortly. You can look at your policies if they're in effect for short-term disability, unemployment benefits from the state and federal, that program, and I'll address that later, and family leave, which gives weeks of leave without pay. But again, those are being supplemented so people will have the ability to pay their bills and get compensation. Because, as I mentioned earlier, that certain of our employee manuals and procedures were not crafted with COVID-19 in mind, you may have to issue, and you may issue as an employer, supplemental sick leave policies that cover precisely the pandemic we're going through. Now, a lot of those policies, employees can't come back until you get a return to work note. The government is asking us not to require that return to work note, not to have a note from a healthcare provider or a doctor saying that the person's fit to return, because as what is envisioned, our healthcare resources will be overwhelmed, and writing notes is not something that they want doctors to be concentrating on. I would recommend for your employees that you do not ask them to travel on behalf of the business. COVID-19 is now designated as a known hazard. If you send somebody into an area that's a level 3 or 2 Center for Disease Control risk area, that is all of Europe currently, many Asian countries, and even places in the United States, such as Seattle, which they've had extreme outbreaks. So let's not ask our employees to travel. Let's not ask them to go into an area that could be a known hazard and increase their risk for contracting any of these virus symptoms. You can ask your employees if they have sick family members. That is something that is permitted now, because if one is exposed to COVID-19, you can ask them to self-isolate and go home for 14 days. Next slide, please, Kathy. If somebody discloses to you, and I have this here twice on purpose, if an individual comes to you and tells you, I have been tested positive for COVID-19, you need to maintain confidentiality. You have an obligation to tell your other employees, one of our employees has tested positive, but you should not and cannot tell people who that individual is. That is personally identified medical information and must be kept confidential. The same is for sick family members. If one of your employees has a sick family member that has been diagnosed with coronavirus, you cannot disclose that name, but you should have a duty that Bob was tested positive. Bob works here at your business. Bob has been exposed, therefore you may be exposed as well. Therefore, we should take certain precautions, and you should take personal precautions. You can disclose exposure, and in that case, because exposure is not a medical condition. So if someone is diagnosed with coronavirus, you cannot say that individual specifically by name has been diagnosed, but you can disclose if an individual was exposed, because that's not a medical condition. I know these rules are drawing straws and splitting hairs, but you should know the difference. What do you do if you have an employee who will not come to work? I'm sorry, I'm staying at home. Well, you know, I'm in a position that I can't come, I don't want to come to work. I fear that I may get sick. I have responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera. You should honor that if someone does not want to come. You can require that they use sick leave. You can require that they use personal time off. You can allow people to go into a negative balance of their sick leave, PTO, or vacation time. You can allow them to borrow over future time. And you should actually be encouraging remote work if your individual employees can function effectively remotely. Our law firm is using remote working for our employees. We have issued computers. We've issued all kinds of electronic assistance for people to work remotely. And frankly, it's working out fairly well. There are obviously some issues always, but you know, I think this whole experience might show that we all don't have to come to work every single day. Someone who has no symptoms, you can send them home with leave without pay. But again, that's going to change again, especially if you're in the state of Colorado, which on March 11th, I believe it was, passed a law effective immediately for paid sick leave. The city, I think, is it Sacramento, that also has paid sick leave, or Chicago has paid sick leave that you must give certain hourly employees paid sick leave. Can we move to the next slide, please, Kathy? You can require people to use their paid sick leave. I've been reading a lot of things that the optics of that isn't good. I think, you know, we should cooperate, and I think the federal government will step in, and they will through the Emergency Paid Leave Act, which has overridden what is also being considered, but that would give immediate paid leave for individuals that are laid off or sent home for 80 hours in a week. What about an employee who will not,
give me some time here. I'll come and find you when I'm done.
What about an employee who will not go on a service call?
Yeah, there's no point standing around.
That employee who will not go on service call should be honored if they feel that they'll be at risk or there is a hazard by going on that service call. We've had an instance with an RSPA member where an individual is asked to perform service at a hospital. The hospital, you know, was a concern to the technician. He did not want to go. First thing we did was contact the hospital to see what their procedures were, what they've implemented to protect individuals and service people that came. We showed those to the technician. We tried to show what we've done. And we'll talk about a little later about what are some of the other options. But it was concluded that this person didn't want to go. We would send another service technician. Well, of course, when Bob won't go, and you go to John and say, John, you go take this call. And why am I going if Bob won't go? You might have a problem and might have to make some adjustments. Your employees, you can do a reduction in force at this time if in fact the business is not up to speed and you're not getting as many calls, if you don't need as many employees as you currently have. Again, if there's a rift, they may be entitled to unemployment compensation, which is mandated by both state and federal entities and varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. You can put an employee on furlough. A furlough is where you reduce the number of hours or the number of days that an individual will be working. If you have an individual working 40 hours, you can drop them to 32. You should do that for all people within the same category, all technicians, all salespeople, all admin, whatever else it's going to be. You can lay off people, which is a category that typically designates that the person will be laid off for a period, but expected to return when things change. If an individual were to contract COVID at work, it may be possible to make a workers' compensation claim. So in other words, that individual technician went to the hospital, felt they contracted it there. They may be a workers' compensation claim, which also would give monetary relief and help. There is no vaccine for coronavirus at this time. And if there is one, you may not mandate that your employees all take it. It's like the flu shot. You can make it available, it's optional, but people who would object for religious or other reasons, then the EEOC requirements come into play, and you cannot mandate that at all. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now that we've talked about your employees, what about your customers? Many customers, many businesses are prohibiting outsiders. They don't want anyone to come into their business. They've locked the doors, and under those circumstances, they are entitled to do that. If you're asked to come on a service call, you are entitled to inquire of that customer whether or not they have had any positive results for COVID-19. Anyone tested positive in their organization. You are entitled to ask, have any of your employees traveled to any of the restricted areas in the last 14 to 30 days? You can, or 0 to 30 days if you want. You're entitled to ask those questions, and you can make a decision as to dispatching an individual based on the answer. Greetings, as you all know, we're doing, elbow clicks and everything else. I would encourage you not to shake hands and under any circumstance with anyone you encounter. Look at the terms and conditions of your support maintenance agreements to see if you have a force majeure clause. That basically says that due to circumstances beyond your control, you cannot perform under the contract. And that may be a possibility in several instances. So although your support and maintenance agreement requires a 4-hour response time, or a 1-day response time, or whatever it's going to be, the force majeure clause may be able to be invoked in order to eliminate your need to go. Of course, remote help should be encouraged. Anything that can be signed, remedied remotely should be used. Some of people are asking if they can come to the establishment off hours. So if the business that needs help, let's say it's a grocery store that's open 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., can I come at 10 p.m.? It's encouraged you determine the problem beforehand. If possible, that individuals at the store not be present, and not you do not have to encounter those people. Of course, there'll have to be someone there to let you in and supervise, but keep your 6-foot distance, determine what's needed beforehand, and see if you can come at hours where the establishment's not open to the public. Some people are limiting calls for their customers to emergency calls only. Most of our maintenance support agreements define different levels of service requirements. Usually there's about 4 levels, the top being emergency, and that being the only one that is going to be honored. Customers have asked if they're closed down. We've had requests for credit adjustments. That's a business policy, ladies and gentlemen. If one of your customers says, I wasn't open for 30 days due to COVID-19, I want another month extension, I doubt you have that obligation under your contractual arrangement, but in these hard times, that may be something that promotes goodwill, something you may want to honor. One more slide, Kathy. Let me give you some additional considerations. Look at your insurance policies. If you have, most commercial policies have a provision for business interruption. You may not have checked that or taken it, but your business is being interrupted. There may be financial repercussions for that. Look at it. Same, you may have travel cancellation insurance. Some of the travel companies are alleging that COVID-19 is not a basis for cancellation. I will tell you that they're not getting very far with that. The airlines have been good, hotels have been good. People are trying to cooperate. Last night, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 6201, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. This mandates free testing, paid leave. This one was after 14 days, but the other law they did gives immediate paid leave. So there'll be immediate paid leave in this package, in my estimation. So you don't have to worry about those people using sick leave, using PTO, using vacation time, at least for the first 14 days. Enhanced unemployment insurance just is exactly what that is. They're making it more available, more readily available to pay people who aren't able to work due to shutdowns, due to governmental requirements. There's also some food security and health security provisions. I want to also caution you to alert all of your customers and your employees to be wary of any malware. There are a lot of emails going out with attachments that have, promises and cures and procedures regarding COVID-19. These are phishing expeditions. The crooks seem to be weathering this storm rather well, but beware and warn people not to click on any of those attachments or any of those emails they don't recognize or they're not familiar with. Those are the do's and don'ts. I've exceeded my time, for which I apologize, but we are so fortunate, so very fortunate, that our chairwoman, Chelsey Paulson, is available to speak with you regarding communications. And Chelsey is so qualified for this due to her HR responsibilities at North Country. Chelsey is responsible for hundreds of employees and their HR requirements, and she has been battling this on a daily basis and addressing it on a daily basis. Chelsey, what do you suggest and what's available?
All right, thank you very much, Bob. That was very informative. I've read a lot of information, attended a lot of webinars recently, and I still had some notes that I took down from that. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this as well. I'm making a case for communication. I think we all know that it's very important to communicate at any point, but specifically during times of crises. And this is really a time for leaders to step up, for our leaders to take responsibility, because our employees are coming to us. They're looking to us as the employers, as the top leaders in the organization, for guidance on what are we doing, what's going on, what's going to happen with the business. And so I just want to go through some of the whys, the hows, the whats in regards to communication, and also talk about what we're doing at North Country. Are we doing everything right? Probably not. We're just like everyone else. We're figuring this out every day, and in some cases every hour at a time. So just want to talk through what we're doing in hopes that I can give you some good takeaways and things that you can implement into your businesses as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is why communicate. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You're probably wondering why in the world are you talking about this right now. I've seen this many times. I've been talked to about it many times, and it's always been one of those things that made sense. But in times of crisis, this has been crystal clear that we need to be thinking about this order of needs for our people, for ourselves as well. We can't expect our employees to come to us to ask questions. We need to go to them and make sure that we're meeting their basic needs first. So we look at what are basic needs, things like shelter, food, water. Then you also look at things like sleep. That is a basic need. A lot of people, myself, are having a hard time sleeping. You have all these things going on in your head, and how are you going to handle things? And so there's not much we can do there, but just understanding if those basic needs aren't being met, you can't get to the next level. And so what are the psychological needs that might need to be met? Before you can meet those, these basic needs need to be met. So you look at things like security. A lot of this probably isn't happening right now. Security for their family, for their employment, for resources like food, like money, like their health, like their social stability. All of these things are up in the air right now. So what can we do as employers, as leaders, to help kind of put some of those fears at rest through communication? So first, these basic needs need to be met, and then we get to the psychological needs. And what those needs are a sense of connection, friendship, and these things need to be met before you can get to the self-fulfillment. And so when we're talking about social distancing, so many people working remotely, you lose that sense of connection. So I have some tips I want to mention as we go through here on how to enhance that. And then the very top is the self-fulfillment, and that's where we want our people every day. That's where they're problem solving. That's where they're their best selves. They're at their full potential. They're actually getting the work done to their fullest potential. So what can we do to help build up the confidence and build up that in our employees so that they're able to get the work done? So how does this relate to my business? The first thing you need to do is build trust, and that needs to happen right off the bat. Again, our employees are coming to us for guidance, and so this can really be our time to shine and to be that resource and be that support that our people are looking for. And in an age where every employee has the ability to be a spokesperson for our company, if we're going to have better internal communications and we're going to have better reactions and actions to this situation, the better that they're going to be promoting our organizations and the better we're going to come out of this afterwards. This will pass. We don't know how long it'll take, but it will pass. And so if you build that trust up now, you're going to build up that brand loyalty, both from your employees and from your customers. So doing what you can to keep them safe, to keep them employed, to keep them whole from a financial perspective, that's going to keep you running for the long haul. There may be a short-term financial loss, but in the long term, we should be able to come out of this a lot better if we're building that trust, we're communicating, we're supporting our people. And so that's one of the cases I'm trying to make today, and what's needed. Continued productivity, of course. When people don't know what's going on, they're not hearing from you, they don't know what your stance is, they don't know what's being done. Even if you're doing all kinds of things behind closed doors, they don't know that. So communicating to what's being done, otherwise they're making it up in their heads. They think the business is going to shut down. They think they're going to lose their jobs. They think that, they think the world is going to come crashing down because they don't know otherwise. So communicating with them what's going on will help them get rid of some of those fears and be able to be more productive. They're asking themselves a lot of questions, and so ask, what questions are my people asking themselves? How are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are they concerned about? And how can I ease their fears and concerns? And then, as I've already mentioned a little bit, the minimizing the brand damage. If you're going on a communication blackout and you're not communicating everything, that's going to affect how your employees feel about returning to work, because our economy is in a good spot. And so when we come out of this, all things are pointing to right now, from what I've heard, that we're in a better spot than we are now, than we've been in any other crisis in the last several decades. And so we should be able to come out of this. And so when we do, are they going to stick with you, or are they going to go somewhere else? It's already been a very, very tough recruiting environment. And so maintaining these relationships and that trust, as I mentioned, that brand loyalty, your employment loyalty is a key thing to be thinking about right now too. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about how to communicate. The most important thing with the how is to be frequent, to be clear, to be consistent, transparent. All of these things are going to help you with your communication to your people. Frequently, be proactive. As I said, don't wait for your people to come to you asking the questions. Try to get ahead of it as much as you can. Act fast. Even if you don't know exactly what is going on or what the future steps are going to be, or it's going to change, communicate that. Be transparent. Here's where we're at today, but this is an evolving situation that we need to make sure that we can stay on top of, and we're actively monitoring the situation, make sure they're aware of that, and then be as consistent as you can. Our number one goal is to keep our employees safe and healthy and to keep our business running. And so the decisions we're making on a daily basis are to support that number one goal. They understand that this is evolving and changing. They see the news, they're reading the things, they're hearing the things. So that's not news to them. And it's better to make a decision and then go back and change it than to make no decision at all and let your people come up with their own conclusions on what's happening or what's going to happen. As far as the source of who's saying this, the more consistent you can be with that, the better. I think it's ideal for the CEO to be doing that communication, and then to push it out, to your leaders, and have your leaders kind of cascade that same message as well. So if your senior leaders or your CEO can be that one doing the communication to all, and then have the other leaders do the next round of communication, that's how you can get that consistent communication happening as well. As far as the delivery goes, of course, in person is always best, but that's not being recommended right now. So the next best option is video. If you have the ability to use Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting or whatever it might be, always turn on your videos. I talked about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that connection, that friendship, those relationships are one of the things that drive human needs and what helps them be successful. If we're isolating ourselves and being in our homes and not having that interaction we're used to, the next best way to do that is through video. So I encourage that as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then honesty is the best policy. Again, if you don't know what's going on, you don't have a plan for something yet, and your people are asking you about it, just let them know that. We don't have a plan for that, but we're actively working on it. Just be real, and they'll appreciate that. And then the image you see there is kind of the method that communication happens through. You have the person giving the message. There's some channel that it's coming through, whether it's video or email or text, and there's all kinds of noise going on around that. And then you have the actual message itself with all kinds of noise going on around it, and then it's actually getting to the person receiving it. So the noise level right now for everyone is so high. So the need for communication, for frequency of communication, could not be greater. So just because you think, oh, well, I've communicated it once, so that's good. No, it's not good. I've been saying for a couple years now, if you're going to communicate something 7 times in 7 ways, and the reality of it is now, before you can get it out 7 different times in 7 different ways, it's changed. So the frequency of it, even if it's just bits and pieces here and there, that's what needs to be done. So on the next slide, we have what to communicate. Bob, I left the technical pieces of that to Bob, but I'm talking more in general terms about what we're communicating. And the first thing is just to acknowledge that you have a sense of what's going on. Because again, if you're just ignoring this, you're not communicating this, then your people are figuring this out on their own and making assumptions. So acknowledge what's going on, articulate what you're doing. What steps have you already taken, and what steps are you currently looking at, and what's potentially going to happen in the future. Again, making sure that it's clear that this is ever changing, and things can change as we go on a daily basis. And then that communication with leaders specifically is very important. Helping your leaders understand what's expected of them in times like this. For us, we're saying, we're expecting our leaders to be calm, to find that balance between optimism and realism. We don't want to be Pollyanna about this, because there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of unknowns, but yet we don't want to be that doom and gloom either. So finding that balance between the two, but being realistic and being real with them as well, of that, I'm concerned and I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know what's going to happen with my spouse's job or with my friend's job or with my job, or having that real conversation with them is a good thing to do. Being flexible and creative. We need to be very, very open to flexibility, to creativity for people's jobs, what they're doing, how they're doing it, where they're doing it from. I cannot stress this enough. This is, I think, the #1 thing as employers we need to figure out. A lot of us have been doing some of this already. Over the years, we've been having more remote workers, more flexibility with time, or working from home. But for some of us, this is brand new. And for some of us, some of our people don't have the capabilities. They don't have a laptop. Their work is done on site, and they don't have a whole lot of in-office type work. And so figuring out what does that look like for them? How can we make this work for the time being until we get through this? And I think the best way to do that is asking them, what do you need? We can't have a blanket answer or blanket policy for all of our people. We have over 150 people at North Country. We're dealing with every single person on an individual basis. Everyone has different needs during this time. I have 3 people that directly report to me. Every single one of them, we've taken a different approach for working from home, the hours they're working, when they're working, where they're working, the projects that they're working on. And so we need to be very, very open with that. And one of the best ways is just asking them, what do they need? There's, as of yesterday, there's 39 states that have closed schools completely. Minnesota, where I am, being one of them. How do you handle that for your employees that have kids? And again, being open and realistic to some situations that might happen. I took, our senior leadership team met yesterday morning. I took the call up in my bedroom, and we were using video because we've been encouraging that. I took the call from my bedroom because my kids were downstairs having gym class, because that's what was on our homeschool schedule at that time. So yes, there was some noise, there's some basketballs dribbling in the background, and that's just realistic. And so be okay with that, be flexible with how things happen. And then be empathetic. Listen to their concerns. Let them know their concerns are normal, and it's okay to have worries, and don't get defensive about things. And when you start your conversations, ask with a real how are you, not just a passing in the hallway how are you, but how are they feeling, what's going on, how's their family holding up. Asking questions and being human about all of this, I think is going to go, I know is going to go a really long ways. And then last thing on this slide is just assuring your employees that you're actively monitoring the situation, because it is ever changing, and you want to make sure that you're using the best information out there to make decisions. And that's not the general media. That is from resources like Bob had talked about that are reputable and are giving the facts. So we're talking, you know, the CDC and WHO, the World Health Organization, are two of the best resources out there. OSHA has some great things on their site. Referring back to the FLSA and the laws that they have, there's a lot of good information on their site. The Department of Homeland Security has some really good information on airport restrictions. So using these resources that are reputable sources that are using the facts, those are the best resources for you to use, and also to push out to your employees to be looking at those sources as well. So on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about remote workers, because as I said, for some of us, this is brand new, and for some of us, we've been doing this. So if you haven't been doing this, I think there's some really important tips that you need to be aware of. And even if you have been doing this, these are some best practices to think back on to figure out, you know, maybe I could do this better. And the first thing is having regular check-ins with each employee that is working from home. This is to, of course, ensure productivity. We need to make sure that our people are still working. Maybe it's not the same level that we've been used to, but you know, we can still require them to be productive to get things done, but also to check in to see how are they doing. Engage in that small talk that would normally happen in the office. So regular check-ins is crucial. Establishing guidelines right away. So if you haven't done this yet, this is the very first thing I would say. Go back, establish some guidelines for working remotely. I'm talking very basic things. How many times a day or a week should that person check in with you? Different people are going to have different requirements. If you have a new hire that just started a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, they're still getting acclimated, you should be checking with them every single day. If you have someone who's tenured, they've been there 5, 10 years, they can kind of roll on their own, maybe it's not as frequent, but don't lose sight of them either. They still need support and guidance and to know that you're there for them. Prioritize what tasks or projects they should be working on, and set specific deadlines for them, because this is going to help to make sure that things are getting done, and setting those expectations of what you need done for your company and as a leader. The third thing is think video first. I wanted to make sure that I was sharing video with you today so that you could see me, because this is something that we are highly encouraging all of our leaders to do with every conversation they're having with their people. If it's a one-on-one conversation or if it's a group meeting, we're asking that everyone share their webcams, because it gains that connectedness and that feeling of togetherness that you don't always have when you're working remotely that you would normally have in the office. And then if you are having those team meetings, allow time for water cooler talk. Those conversations that would normally happen in the office, allow 5-10 minutes in the beginning of meetings to, maybe not every meeting, but for every now and again, allow time for that to happen. And maybe you give a topic for discussion. Maybe you ask, you know, what's the best thing that's happened over the last week? You know, try to stay positive with things, or what's the most interesting thing you learned, or maybe what's the best educational free app that you found for your kids to use while they're home from school. Anything like that that can help promote that interaction and conversation. And then the last thing is be available. If your people are reaching out to you, get back to them as quickly as you can. Let them know that you're there for them, you're there to support them, and give them multiple ways to contact you, whether that's IMing you, texting, email, phone, of course, through, you know, what we talked about, webcams and so forth, making sure that they know that you're there to support them and that you're showing that through your actions by getting back to them as quickly as you can. So last thing I want to talk about real quick before we open it up for questions is, what is North Country doing? A lot of what we just talked about. And are we doing all of these things, and are we doing them perfectly? Of course not. But what we're trying our hardest to do is have that frequent, transparent, and clear communication. We've had a live video conference call with our whole company that our CEO did. We recorded it, so it's available for all those who weren't able to watch it live. Our senior leadership team is meeting regularly. We always have regular weekly meetings, but we've increased that, and we're just meeting as needed. As things come up, we'll just call an impromptu meeting to make decisions and focus on you know, what our next steps are going to be, and determine what our focus is right now. And then from those conversations, determining where does this communication need to go. We're often not the best ones as the senior leaders to determine or make decisions on the next steps. It's usually other leaders or other associates within our company that need to make those decisions. So pushing that back out to those who are most qualified to make those decisions. And we're really looking at this as a, you know, you talk about business continuity and how are you keeping your business functioning and running. We're spending a lot of time around this right now. And again, we're not always the best as a senior leadership team to make those decisions. So pushing it back out to our leaders, and not just people leaders and who have direct reports, but to anyone who's stepping up and taking action in your company. Allow them the ability to be a part of those conversations. This is a huge opportunity for leadership to develop. It's a great training ground for people. You can see what people are made of, who steps up, and hopefully now in the future that could be a great, you know, person to promote, to give additional projects or tasks or responsibilities to in the future. So looking at this as an opportunity to for those people to gain some really, really valuable experiences. Look at what backlog opportunities that we have. You know, what are some of those, say for a rainy day type situations, that projects we'd like to get done, and trying to get those done during this time. We've been very good about email communications. They've usually been very long email communications because there's a lot to communicate out. But again, starting from one single source, so it's all coming from our CEO. We're making sure our leaders understand what's going on so they can support and answer questions to their employees, and just reiterating that we're available to contact our CEO, contact me from an HR perspective, contact their leaders. So they're seeing we're available to help support them during all of this. One of our core values is associate focused, and so we're trying to show empathy. How are people feeling? What are they going through? What are we going through? And you can relate to what everyone else is going through. And like I said before, having those individual actions for each person, because everyone has a unique situation for their home life and what's going on there. And then from a customer perspective, you know, again, we got to look at this from each situation being unique. You know, we have, of course, have sent out a letter or an email as most businesses have, just letting our customers know what we're doing for our employees, and that ensuring their safety is our first and most important thing that we're working on. And if our associates are still coming on site, that they're maintaining that 6-foot social distancing policy that's being recommended. Reassuring our customers that we have the tools and resources to support them remotely, and in some cases do implementations and upgrades and so forth remotely as well. So we still can get things done if they need and want things to get done. Many restaurants and bars have closed down, and in the vast majority of states we do business in actively, have shut down their bars and restaurants. And so I loved on LinkedIn yesterday when Jim Roddy had posted a link about this webinar. A woman had responded and said, you know, it might be a great idea For your hospitality customers, can you push out through social media who's doing takeout, who's doing delivery, which customers are doing that, and to try to support them in that way. So I love that, finding unique ways to support your customers during this time. Again, be creative, be flexible. What can you do in this downturn? Because things will come back, we will get out of this. And so then what's going to happen after that? So support your customers in any way you can, even if it's not through your traditional means of supporting them. So that's what I have. I think I'll turn it back to Kathy here, and I'm sure we have some questions, and I know we're kind of running up on our deadline here, but I know I can stick around for a few extra minutes if we need to.
Great. I want to thank both Bob and Chelsey for all of the excellent information and for taking time out to be with us this afternoon. I am going to start with some questions. Again, if you have a question for either Chelsey or Bob, please feel free to either submit it through the chat box, or if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you can do that as well to ask a question. Bob, I think the first question would probably be for you. I understand that we can/should restrict business travel for our employees, but what about employees that travel for personal reasons?
It is not possible to restrict personal travel. That's something they do on their own time, but you can ask people where they've been and what they've done in terms of if they've gone to Europe, they've gone to any of the designated countries or areas that have been restricted. We're not allowed to restrict personal travel, but you can inquire about it and take action based on what you find.
Okay.
I have one here too, Kathy. Somebody said our receptionist is wearing a face mask. We don't issue face masks, and I would prefer that she doesn't. Can I instruct her to take off her mask? The answer is no. She has the right to wear that mask and take the precautions that she wants to take.
Bob, I actually had a question for you. When you were talking about furloughs and reducing hours or days worked, and if you do it in a full category of people, which I understand, how do you handle that, or can you do that with exempt employees who are not hourly?
Could you repeat that, Chelsey?
Yeah, so for salaried workers or for exempt workers, how do you handle furloughs for them? Is that possible? Because if they work any time during a week, you have to pay them for the whole week. So how do you, or can you do furloughs with salaried employees?
A salaried employee can be furloughed for an entire week, and you must take steps to ensure that they don't do any work. So if during that furloughed week, they got one email from you, where's the pencil drawer in your office? And they responded, they would lose that furloughed position. So if you're going to furlough someone who's an exempt employee, it must be for a minimum of a week, and you cannot ask them to do anything. One thing, and they're not furloughed.
We have another question. If retail stores close, how are their employee wages affected by this?
That's been discretionary. I think if they're closed now under federal law, they'll get 14 days of unemployment compensation. There also may be state rules that give them compensation as well. But some establishments have come out and said we're going to pay our employees during this period. How long is another question. I think many of the employers felt that it was going to be a 14-day window that they would be paying for 2 weeks. Now we see things going on to April, May, June, July. There will be some adjustments made.
We did get a question just for everybody's information about getting a copy of the slide deck. So let me just reiterate that we are recording the session, and we will be posting the session as well as the slides will be available to download. That should be out there by tomorrow afternoon. And if we have time, we've got one that just came in. Can you convert non-exempt employees to part-time hourly during this time?
The answer is yes, but you should do it for everyone uniformly. So if it's a class of technicians, salespeople, admin, all of those people should be reduced appropriately. You can convert non-exempt employees who are already hourly to part-time hourly. That would be basically a furlough where you reduce their hours or days working.
Okay. If there are no additional questions, again, thank you to Bob and Chelsey both for their time this afternoon. And again, you can contact the RSPA at any time with questions, or Bob's legal line is open as well. Thank you, everybody.